Fantastic. Okay, so moving swiftly on to our next and final session of this conference. Here we're going to be looking at other business sectors and how they're engaging with hydrogen, how they're perceiving hydrogen. And I think for me this is super important because we've had many years of slightly talking to ourselves, and those conversations have progressed and the sector's grown and we're accelerating progress on many, many fronts. And certainly from an HEA point of view, we're now seeing that we need to engage with a much wider range of stakeholders to make this happen. So I'm really excited to welcome you all to the stage and for us to have this conversation. And I think, again, because we're a group of people from very different places in the sector, it'll be really interesting to hear a little bit about yourselves and also why you're interested in hydrogen. So, Jonathan, if you'd like to go first.
Right, well, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. So I'm a senior policy advisor with the agricultural sector. I've been working in energy policy for, 30 years or more. We have a fairly wide umbrella view across all energy technologies. We are essentially rather technology neutral. I think I'd probably count myself among the slightly skeptical members of this conference in the sense that we don't see any obvious applications of hydrogen technology for regular agricultural use by our farmer and grower members. While it's nice to think about the idea of farmers riding around on hydrogen-powered tractors and so on, the technology mostly is not there. We did nevertheless set an ambition for our industry back in 2019, about the same time as the government came out with its own ambition, to make the agricultural sector essentially net zero within 20 years, by the year 2040. And I think we would share with many other of the speakers today a certain amount of frustration that we're on this, very low part of the S-curve. We really want to see the future today, and we are a little frustrated at the slow pace of policy development and to some extent the lack of consistency that we've seen from government on this topic. I think we also have to be aware of what's happening in other technological areas. So electric vehicles do seem to be spreading into more and more sectors. We started off with domestic. We're now seeing quite a lot in the sort of bus and truck sector. And we're just seeing the first signs now of non-road mobile machinery also being available in sort of battery electric form. We don't have tractors at the moment, and we have to also be realistic about the fact that a lot of our agricultural machinery has a fairly slow turnover time. So there is going to be a legacy, both in the national vehicle pool, but also in the specialist vehicle pools. And some of that legacy will be met by rather conventional drop-in replacement fuels like vegetable oil, biodiesel, and things like that. In the longer term, I think HVO, hydrotreated vegetable oil, again, a synthetic diesel that can be made from bio-based resources. But if we then move on to look at the alternatives, in addition to battery vehicles, we can see already the use of biomethane, both in heavy trucks, but also from at least one of the major manufacturers as an alternative tractor fuel. And I will come to ammonia as well, which has been certainly talked about yesterday and today as a very interesting small molecule, one of the synthetic fuels that may well in the future be made from hydrogen. So we've seen technical progress and demonstration in some areas. We're certainly mindful of JCB's very bold demonstration of hydrogen combustion in a telehandler, in some trucks, and in a front loader. But I do believe that we really do need to see the safety case made here. Farms are dangerous places. Our industry is not particularly proud of its safety record, and we are concerned about anything that might exacerbate those risks. Lastly, though, I would say that there are exciting future opportunities if we come back to ammonia. because we heard, I think you heard yesterday from the regional government of Western Australia about the size of investments being made by people like Twiggy Forrest and Mike Cannon-Brookes and various other people in the private sector in Australia into large-scale renewable electricity production, into hydrogen. But how is that hydrogen going to be transported to Europe? In the form of ammonia. Ammonia is so much safer and easier to ship, and an existing infrastructure exists in the fertilizer sector. Big message there to farmers that some of the decarbonisation that we need to deliver in the agricultural sector will probably be through green ammonia into fertilizer manufacture, taking out at a stroke one of the very major inputs into the carbon footprint of the food that we eat. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Really interesting to hear a perspective on hydrogen from the NFU. Luke.
Hello, I'm Luke Herbert. I'm Executive Director for Communications and External Affairs at Climate Group. We're an international non-profit focused on driving climate action fast. We do that by building powerful networks focused on ambitious goals of climate action involving businesses and government. We work with over 500 multinationals and over 200 governments internationally. We're based here in UK, Europe, North America, China and India. Our interest really comes from the importance of hydrogen, first and foremost for the industrial sector. We believe that industry, which is often called a hard-to-abate sector, is actually an abatable sector, and that we are now seeing fantastic technological solutions and practical solutions coming through for areas such as concrete, but also most particularly for hydrogen steel as well. So we run a program called Steel Zero, where we believe a lot of the work we do is working with the demand side sector. So we've built this program, Steel Zero, which now has over 30 multinational businesses signed up to be buying cleaner hydrogen in the future. So we aim towards 100% net zero, cleaner steel in the future, aiming to 100% net zero steel by 2050, but also interim targets, so 50% lower carbon steel by 2030 as well. And there's a lot more detail behind that, but effectively it's creating in a way, a quasi-international standard in terms of the pathway and expectations of those companies who are the biggest purchasers and buyers of steel in the world about what they need from their supply chain, from their suppliers, which should help stimulate a collaborative and a coordinated approach to investment and actually competition for their business in the future as well. So positive competition for cleaner steel. We've got the likes of Maersk, Ørsted, and just last week we had the signing ceremony of a company called CIMC, which you may not have heard of, but actually they manufacture 50% of all containers that go on ships and trucks that are made in China. So obviously those go around the world as well. So huge customers, Siemens Gamesa, others as well, who are aligned towards this. And we think that this is a great way to actually drive the business case for cleaner steel and for the investment in hydrogen and the clean power to power green hydrogen in the future as well behind that. We're very cognizant, though, of the scale of the supply chain here. It's an international supply chain. 50% of steel in the world is made in China. And obviously, China is also manufacturing many manufactured goods with steel as components, which are going around the world as well. So we need to have a whole supply chain approach, really, to deliver this, and actually a coordinated international approach. When it comes to the steel sector, it's not a sector known for international coordination. It's more known for trade wars and competition, so geopolitical competition. So we need to work through that, and we are engaging with multiple elements of the supply chain to try and understand what is required to take that whole scale flip of the supply chain on a global basis. We work in other areas as well related to this. So for example, our I-100 program, it's got over 400 multinationals who are committed to purchasing 100% renewable electricity. And through that work, we're also understanding how the challenges that we're going to have in terms of power. So if you look at Asia, for instance, which is really important to this agenda, then you're not seeing at the moment the scale of action or the targets that are needed on renewable energy, even to transform existing electricity use into being powered through renewable or clean sources. There's a long way to go on that. In fact, in some countries like South Korea, we're seeing some backward moves as well. And then that creates concerns in terms of the ability of those countries to position themselves in future industry and to be able to have the energy, the clean energy to power green hydrogen and then steel in the future as well. And then the other perspective, which we'll come on to later, is around where hydrogen is pushed as a potential solution or option, where there are other options which are actually available and are known to work already, and concerns where in other sectors where that may be causing delay or distraction from the scale and speed of action that is needed to drive emissions down this decade, not just positioning for future decades as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Owen.
Yes, hi, my name's Owain Mortimer. I'm the Technology and Innovation Manager at the SMMT, so that's the Society for Motor Manufacturers and Traders, and we represent any organisations in the UK that are involved in the automotive industry, and that can be right down from small suppliers of components and parts, all the way up to the large vehicle manufacturers and also service providers as well. So our interest obviously lies in the fact that a growing number of our members are interested in hydrogen, for obvious reasons, in the propulsion side, but not just in the propulsion side, that we're looking more now at life cycle emissions reductions of vehicles. So that includes us trying to focus on the manufacturing processes. So hydrogen obviously can potentially play some role there for manufacturers. And then right the way through as well. So we represent people who are involved in fuel cells in other technologies as well. So we want to make sure that the policy landscape in the UK has the right conditions for those technologies to be deployed, should they be seen to be the right solution in certain sectors and certain areas. In road transport, I think we want to have a kind of focused approach to getting them out on the road now, getting vehicles out on the road and making sure that people can use those types of technology if they need to. Usually, it's sort of said in the heavy-duty sector, which would make sense. There will be more likely a higher prevalence of hydrogen propulsion vehicles there. But we want to make sure that it's available for all use cases where it's appropriate. And that's the main area really. And then the SMMT, as I said, it's a growing area of interest. Lots more companies than previously are looking at it now. We've published our hydrogen vehicles position paper, which is the first formal position paper we've had on this. So it kind of shows you the prevalence of those views within the membership now, that this is important. It needs to be looked at. We'll get onto, I'm sure, the electric versus hydrogen, but it's not seen as either or versus. It's a useful component in the tool to decarbonisation, which we need to get to.
Okay, thanks, Owen. Mark.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Watts, Chief Executive of UK Transport in Europe. We represent a number of Britain's leading transport organisations and companies in Brussels, including Civil Aviation Authority, Office of Rail and Road, Transport for London, ABP, Railway Industry Association, etc., etc. So we're very much very keen that this debate is happening in the UK as it's happening elsewhere. And this conference is a great opportunity to, I think, bring some of the strands together. We think transport is the laggard in this whole debate very often. We remind people it's the only sector since 1990 where CO2 emissions have actually gone up, the only industrial sector. And the forecast for Europe in the next 10 years is that the only sector where CO2 emissions will go up is transport, despite all the hard work that we're all putting in to decarbonise. So we need drastic action, and one of the solutions we believe is indeed hydrogen. But we are technology neutral because we think batteries, we think methanol, we think ammonia, we think biofuels. Every single alternative to fossil fuels will be required to decarbonise transport. So that's why events like this are so important. We want to give hydrogen a push, but let's look at the scale of the challenge. I'll give you some figures and then I'll conclude. The UK has set a target roughly of 1.5 million tonnes per year production of hydrogen by 2030. The EU has set a target of 20 million tonnes, 10 million produced by the EU, 10 million imported by 2030. America has set an even higher target. So our basic position in Brussels and elsewhere is that we're only going to meet these targets if we have coordination, cooperation internationally, and above all, common standards. And that's really why I'm here today, to make an appeal that rather than developing policy and standards in isolation, we should be promoting international standards that allow the UK to take a leadership role, of course, but allow us to meet our global ambitions.
Music to our ears, I think, Mark. So final member of our panel is Lincoln, and we're going to pull up a chair for Lincoln so that we can hear from him.
Okay.
If you'd like to join us, Lincoln, then if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about sort of your interest in hydrogen. I'll try not to get too hidden behind the lectern there.
Well, I apologise for holding up the show a little bit and making you all
You're fine.
rearrange yourselves, play a bit of musical chairs, but Nuclear Industry Association is the trade body for the civil nuclear industry. And I want to reward you all for your fortitude in making it to the end of the two-day conference by hopefully leaving you an interesting idea. If how many of you have thought that maybe nuclear could be the best way of producing the clean hydrogen that we need? And I just want to leave you with that thought. What do we want from our hydrogen as part of the net zero transition? We want it to be clean. Nuclear has basically the lowest carbon intensity of any electricity generating source. We want it to be reliable. We know that the processes are more efficient, they're lower cost if they have reliable inputs. That's what nuclear provides. We also know that it's more efficient when there's heat involved. What a nuclear reactor is, big source of heat. We get up to 150 degrees, 200 degrees in processed grade hydrogen. You get 10 to 20% efficiency. We're looking at advanced reactors that are generating temperatures of up to 700 degrees Celsius. Big baseload source of heat. You do what you want with it. You can create baseload electricity as we are doing, as we need to keep doing. But let's think about what that could mean for hydrogen. Talk about one Rolls-Royce small modular reactor, 270 tons of clean hydrogen per day. X-Energy, their 4-pack of their advanced reactors, 190 tons per day. Reliable again, very low carbon, baseload production that allows all the people who are the off-takers who want to use it for their industrial production, whatever it may be, to predict it, to rely upon it, and for it to be there. So I just want to leave you with that thought about what our interest in hydrogen might be, because we're an energy producer, so we come out at a slightly different perspective to these other gentlemen, because we're producing energy and we're asking, well, what do people want to do with it? And in terms of how it's used, we would just say, let's think about where the best application of hydrogen is. Where do we need a fuel that we can store, that we can burn, that can produce high temperatures? Let's not go looking for redundant solutions where we already have a proven workable solution, where electrification might already be proven to be a pretty good and competitive process. But let's look at things like industry, where they need, in many cases, many of them need to be burning at temperatures to get up to 1,500 degrees Celsius or higher than that. Or how are you going to do that if you're not using gas and coal? You need something that you can burn in that way, and hydrogen is a great potential solution for that. And the last thing is, what we want to see is hydrogen pursued in a way that is need-based. Where do we need this? Where do we need this fuel to burn it? Where is it the best solution? Not, I have an asset, not quite sure what to do with it. How do I sweat it for a bit more money? And maybe I'll push hydrogen on people. I think that's the way we should approach it. That's the way that leads to the best solutions. But we take a step back at the very highest level. Hydrogen could be the catalyst for a major revolution in industrial production in this country. And in the UK being at the cutting edge of decarbonizing these sectors, everyone says, to date, basically, too difficult. Let's start with something easy, the grid. Let's muck about with the grid where we've had proven solutions for decades. We just haven't implemented them with enough conviction. But let's explore hydrogen in that perspective, and there's a great promise in it, which I'm sure we'll get to in the questions.
Super, thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is take a little bit of a dive down into what we need to deliver against the areas that you guys that have articulated in these opening remarks. I'll start with you, Luke. What would you like to see in terms of evolution of the regulatory environment to help the steel players that you're working with? You mentioned supply chain. How could government play there? Are there other areas? Then we can extend to the rest of you on the panel here, because I'm sure you all have different views on this. But if you could make a start, Luke.
Yeah. Well, actually, on this, the business is leading through setting out their expectations, their purchasing expectations, purchasing standards of what they want from the supply chain. So actually the first thing that governments could do is to replicate that, model that, align their expectations as well. Government is a major customer for steel and industry, for instance, or has a huge, influence over major infrastructure projects which use a lot of the stuff. So that would be the first area. And then I think we do have to understand what we need to do to be able to flip this supply chain as a whole. That involves the finance, the powering, the fueling, the making, and the using. All those elements. So the support that we see, the IRA bill in the US, for instance, we need brave support to help de-risk those huge infrastructure projects to deliver that, and to be able to not just have a demonstrator, but to be able to start to deploy that at scale. And we see that kind of appetite in countries like China, who think big and think across all these different elements of the supply chain, and where you have great, significant coordination, obviously, between government and business. So if Europe, Americas, others want to, compete for future steel making, then we need to model that kind of work here as well, I think.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. Owain, from the SMMT perspective, you mentioned your recent report. What sort of things are you looking at government to do to accelerate progress here?
Yeah, so the paper was specifically on the vehicle side, so it was looking at three main areas. It was on the supply of hydrogen and ensuring that there was enough for all industries that think they need hydrogen to be able to access that at the right time. So that's about providing more clarity about where the government sees the hydrogen going and producing a demand-side kind of strategy or studies and working with industries with those. And then moving on then to making sure that hydrogen in the long term is sustainable and renewable. I'll avoid using the colours, but sustainable and renewable is the goal. However, that's done, so ensuring that the regulatory framework is set up for that. And then moving on to the vehicle side, it's about supporting trials and development, which the government has been doing, but perhaps in a piecemeal way. We've seen with the ZERFT trials programme, it hasn't been announced, there's been delays. So it's been slow in that sense. And just making sure that certain things, that it's a welcoming environment essentially for these vehicles to come to market in the UK and also to be produced here. And then finally, the infrastructure, I think, is a key one. And everyone will have been speaking about this at certain points today in relation to transport. We need more hydrogen refueling stations. We need a more of approach, I think, as well, alongside the Teesside Transport Hub, but the government could help coordinate more of those to unlock that demand. But a national network, or at least planning for where the national network should be of national refueling infrastructure needs to be done. So more clarity, I think, is the big call. More clarity and more pace. Yeah, absolutely. You won't be surprised to hear that those views very much reflect the HEA position, and I know we're due to have a more detailed chat on that, aren't we, Owain? So other perspectives on this topic, the role of government?
I would say is that we would say this, wouldn't I? I'm the nuclear industry's chief lobbyist here in the UK, but we want them to model all the strategies where they said we can use hydrogen for this to include the potential for nuclear hydrogen, because we can really help in providing the reliable supply that it needs to make this market work. Because people won't switch for anything, not just in hydrogen, but in all these other sectors. They won't switch unless they know there's a reliable supply, unless they know there's an abundant supply in the places where they need it. And we particularly want them to see the ambition on advanced nuclear reactors to allow us to site that close to industry, to allow people who basically just need a huge amount of hydrogen very predictably all year round to be able to get that. But the last thing, and I think this may be shared, is what's the incentive that is driving the big customers to move over to hydrogen? How clear is it to them, the roadmap that gets them to shift from burning fossil fuels to burning hydrogen? Because it's probably more straightforward to find ways to create hydrogen. We know how electrolysis works. We know in that sense how to create it. But how do you get someone in the end who actually wants to buy it? That's been the difficulty in the past. We've offered some trials up in the nuclear industry, but where's the market for it? I think that's really area that needs to be a key focus.
Okay. Yeah, Mark?
So I think from our point of view as UCTI in Brussels, we look at the EU and we think they are trying to create a market. That's really what their hydrogen strategy is all about. When they're creating a hydrogen bank, they're setting up regulations. They're far from perfect, but they're things like HFCA, which will mandate the provision of charging infrastructure across the fuels, including hydrogen, but electricity as well. So that's driving and creating the market. But also they're creating a fund. They're extending ETS from the 1st of January next year to shipping. All ships arriving at EU ports will have to pay a levy, as will flights into the EU for the first time ever. And those funds will fund the expansion of the hydrogen industry in Europe. So, for example, this year, so far, the EU has provided subsidies of 15 billion euros to the European hydrogen industry. And as many of you know, the Hydrogen Bank this autumn or winter will launch their first auction that will effectively be contracts for different type instrument. The first tranche of auction credits will be 800 million. So that's what we're up against. Our EU partners are ahead in the race at the moment. Our view at UCTI is we need to work fast and hard, and we can, to catch them up and take them over. But they have a good model. We probably wouldn't want to adopt all of it, but there's a lot of it there that we can learn from. I think we can improve on. But what we can't do, in my view and the view of our members, is just wait, because waiting is not an option.
Yeah.
There's I think it goes across a lot of policy and decarbonisation in the UK, is that time has its own value, in that time is not free. To spend time trying to get things exactly right or to wait for the perfect solution to present itself. That time, the efficiency, the way in which we're able to exploit and get the economic benefits of any innovation is a function of how much time we spend to take. And a little more boldness, a little less time is richly rewarded, even if it means it wasn't quite perfect at the start. It's better off to pursue it, go for it, than to wait around for everything to be just so.
Yeah.
I would agree on that time point. If I could just add one other remark, which is, for the macro regulation in terms of our ambition on energy, the UK has just set its ambition to be self-sufficient for energy in the future. That's not ambitious enough. We should be looking to be a clean energy exporter. And if we aim for that in the UK, then that will enable the cheap, clean, spare power to help support hydrogen as well in the future. And that's the same for everywhere around the world. This is a race. It really is a race here. And those countries which go for that and drive the speed of renewables, other sources of clean power, and achieve that quickly and leverage all their natural resources are the ones that will be producing the hydrogen in the future and be in the leading position for the clean industry of the future as well. And so the UK cannot leave aside its potential for onshore wind, solar, and other steps it needs to make, energy efficiency, to enable it to be in the right competitive position to do that. That's a fundamental regulation that is not yet ambitious enough.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I want to move things along a little bit now and talk about collaboration. So, this can be across all different types, so between government and industry, between industries working together, different parts of industry. I'm interested to hear from you a little bit more, Mark, about governments working together. So you talked about developing common standards and those sorts of things. And from where you're sitting with your trade association, what's working well? What do we need to do? How will collaboration help at that kind of level?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think our experience in Brussels is despite what people think, there's a lot of cooperation going on and a lot of collaboration. I mean, we are where we are, and I don't want to mention a certain word. But that doesn't mean we can't talk to each other and we can't work with each other. And indeed, we continue to travel across the continent, and Europeans continue to travel in the UK, and we continue to trade with each other. So why can't we talk and collaborate and cooperate where we can, where we have common ideals and objectives, as we do in the field of hydrogen policy. So that's really what we're doing. Last week we organised an event with the Scottish Government and the British Government and the industry and the European Commission to explore collaboration. There's a thirst for knowledge in Brussels as well. They don't have all the answers either. I mean, this is cutting edge technology. It really is testing the system to destruction almost. And the Commission really value UK expertise. They want us to be in the room. We don't have to be members of the club to be in the room. So they gave the example, although we're not members yet we're not fully signed up to Horizon Europe. We can still participate in Horizon Europe, and we should do. on hydrogen-funded projects. Still Horizon 2020 projects going on in the hydrogen field. There is a lot of cooperation going on at university level, industrial level. Probably the gap is the political level. We need a bit of political leadership without getting party political. No, we have both parties here at this conference. But I think, the challenge is for the next generation of politicians to fill the vacuum that is a lack of cooperation with our European partners. And on top of that, with our American partners as well, I would say. I know there's a desire for energy security in the UK and self-sufficiency, and we want to be an industrial leader. But as I said, the other countries want to do that too, but they don't see that being incompatible with international collaboration. And I think that's the sort of cultural shift we need in this country. You're not betraying your principles or your ambition by working with partners that share your ideals and your policy objectives.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, John.
Yeah, if I may come in and follow on that, Mark. We've heard something about the North Sea collaboration agreement on interconnectors, multi-purpose interconnectors, whereby electricity from offshore wind might be sold to one country or to another, or indeed it might be processed on site with electrolyzers into hydrogen and thereon into some of these other small molecule products, which again, agriculture has a keen interest in seeing perhaps the UK getting a slice of this global green ammonia industry in the future, particularly for the commodity that we're most interested in, fertilizer. But it would be part of this whole business of developing the resources of the North Sea, creating energy islands on Dogger Bank, or I think there's a station going to be at the end of the Lion Link, the new interconnector from the UK over to Belgium, just about 10 miles out to sea from the Belgian coast. So it's that kind of collaboration that we want to see, rather than the idea that, we're going to completely go it alone and ignore what those other people are doing over there.
Thanks, Jonathan. Other perspectives on collaboration of whatever flavour?
I would just say, I think in collaboration, I want to see something between the people who are producing the energy and the people who are using it, between those two sides of business. I think Rachel from EDF probably talked a little bit about what they're trying to do in that aspect yesterday. But from our perspective in nuclear, there's a lot of people who don't know what we could offer for industry in terms of cogeneration of heat and power, and therefore of hydrogen for industry. And that's really a connection that needs to be made, and not just in between the nuclear sector and customers, but all across, between the people who are going to buy and use this stuff, to make sure that they're working effectively with the people who say we're going to produce a whole bunch. Well, how is that most effectively used in a cost-competitive way by the major industries that we need to decarbonize? I think that's what we need to see a lot more of, and I think governments can catalyze it. And international collaborate between governments, absolutely we have to see it, because there's not enough expertise or capacity in any one government to confront the challenge. On the interconnectors, my only concern with that is the first thing we need to do is grow the pie a whole lot bigger. That's a higher priority than kind of parceling it between us, because at the moment there's a bit of an incentive to say, well, we could just drag in a bit of France's nuclear fleet and that'll cover some of our energy needs and things like that. And the pie's got to get a whole lot bigger on hydrogen, on electricity, on everything. And that would be my priority for collaboration before quite exactly how it's sliced up.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to pause for a second in case we've got any questions from the floor. Yeah.
Hi, just had a question for Lincoln. I think the pink hydrogen idea is really interesting. What are your thoughts on the price per kilo that can be achieved with pink hydrogen, and do you see that potentially being an issue at all?
First of all, on the colours. I think we get a bit lost in the colours. I think that everything that is from a low carbon source or below a certain life cycle carbon tends to just be called green, because that's green, clean, low carbon, rather than getting too much in colours. Again, people sort of forget it and they think that we're offering sartorial advice rather than constructing an energy system. I'm not going to quote any price per kilo, because that's always leaving hostages fortune. But the greatest element in nuclear costs is not operating it, it's not inputs, it's not decommissioning it, it's financing it. If in this country we can get the financing of nuclear stations right, then no, absolutely be no problem with it. There's some 60 years of long, low-cost, predictable operation should be ideal for people who, over the long term, want to operate industrial processes that need a reliable, steady supply of hydrogen. But it does depend on us getting the financing right and on building fleets. So we apply lessons and learning in a way that they've done very successfully in offshore wind. But it's not magic. We know how to do it. We just need to get it done.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to our last question. I think we've got a couple of minutes for each of you. Electrification versus hydrogen, are they mutually exclusive? Owain?
No, I might be surprised that I say
It could be a 10-second answer, couldn't it?
Yeah, of course, yeah, no.
You've got 2 minutes.
Exactly. Definitely not. I think, as you'll see in the automotive industry, battery electric is essential to the decarbonisation journey. Certain that, as the technology progresses, it'll move into other sectors and be able to fulfill other roles. But at the minute, and I think in the future as well, there is no question that there is a need for hydrogen-based propulsion technologies. For certain use cases, definitely at the minute, and I know that there's, didn't come on the collaboration point, but there are collaborations between OEMs and academia to sort of develop these technologies on the heavier side. So that's essential. I think we're even starting to see that it's not mutually exclusive on individual vehicles. We're going to be seeing hybrid vehicles between fuel cell, for example, and battery electrics coming, and potentially other things. So no, I certainly don't think so, and I think that it's. Will everybody here, I'm sure, will know, thinking of it in those terms is probably now a mistake, and we're moving to look at what should be used where and most usefully, I think.
Okay, thanks, Owain. Jonathan, from an agricultural perspective?
I think we need more than just those two options on the table. And some of them may indeed be linked in the sense of, synthetic fuels and so on, made perhaps using renewable hydrogen to provide the reducing power. But, I'll give you an interesting case study. We're quite concerned about what looked like being government policy to go for a heat pump first approach to the decarbonisation of rural heat. Now, we've got farmers who need process heat, or they need to be able to keep livestock, comfortable and alive. And, if you're trying to say, let's do this all with heat pumps, first of all, you're going to make quite a substantial call upon electricity grid capacity. You also have to worry about what you're going to do in the case of interruption of power supply. But equally, we can't just say, oh, well, hydrogen's an ideal source for industrial process heat to heat livestock sheds. No, we need other options on the table, some of which have been used in recent years, bioenergy, for example. But we do need to think these things through. To some extent, if we can solve grid, then we can have farms which are a lot more energy independent and can make more use of electrification. But if we can't solve grid, we need other options on the table.
Yeah, thank you. Lincoln?
If we can solve grid, that's the how many billion is on that question. But that's certainly the case. And I think that what we should think is try to think in a specific and smart way about where electrification might be a better solution, where hydrogen might be a better solution, where you need the mix. What Owen's just said, in the same vehicle, we might need two solutions. And what I think that ladders up to is that we need a proper systems approach to the energy we need. Not just saying, I have this technology, this, and this, and they all have these plant level costs that people pay for. There are huge systems costs in the way you construct the electricity supply, fuels for transport, the way in which the electricity supply provides electricity for transport, how you can use the grid for industry, what kind of fuels they need. All of that together has to work in the most efficient way. And if you don't look at it as a whole system, you're going to end up with huge amounts of excess capacity, huge amounts of redundancy, big peaks and troughs that need to be managed, which have their own huge costs. And so my plea is really not to think about, this tech costs this tech costs this. What about if we all put it together? Because in the end, no one gets a bill for their heat or for their power that says, well, you paid this much for this plant and this much for this plant. You get a whole bill. You pay for it all. And because we pay for it all, we need to look at our need for the whole system. And that'll give us the most effective answer for how we mix and balance the solutions that are available.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Lincoln. Mark?
3 points, if I may. First of all, just remind everyone, transport is one of the big challenges for the hydrogen sector, but also one of the big opportunities. It's the laggard of our society. It's the only sector in society where emissions have gone up in the last 20, 30 years, and they're going to forecast to continue going up. So my second point is, of course, we need hydrogen, but we'll need every single fuel tool in the alternative fuel toolkit. As Jonathan said, we're going to need them all, and that still won't be enough to decarbonise transport. So let's put it into perspective, and that's really my third point. My appeal is I find when I go to events, there's too much criticism and sniping of each other's fuel solutions when we should all be working together, because we all need a stable, common and well-funded regulatory framework.
Thank you. We've got some really good points in here. Luke?
So I'm going to disagree slightly, actually. I think there are areas where how policy and practice is rolling out, where there is a mutual exclusivity. So we see around the world, actually, that hydrogen is being held up as a kind of a fig leaf for additional gas investment and infrastructure and continuing to grow that. So actually we see in certain locations manufacturers being sold gas turbines as a cleaner source of electricity and heat for manufacturing facilities, with promises that they could become green hydrogen in 20 years, for instance, whereas actually it's quite possible for those facilities to move to renewably powered solutions in the very short term as well. And where there are challenges around policy in those countries, then those businesses should be taking on that responsibility to help shift that policy, because that's not the case around the world, for instance. So it is, and we see that also in the US, on city regulation around new buildings and around whether they should be added to the gas network as well, where hydrogen and biofuels are lauded as a potential solution in the future, whereas actually we see, there are very sensible measures on electrification and efficiency which could deliver far greater reductions a lot more quickly. And when it comes to automotive, yes, we run EV100 Plus, for instance, which is where the heavy transport sector is allowing buyers of those vehicles and services to say that they're going to go zero carbon in the future as well. And hydrogen and fuel cells may have a big role to play in larger trucks. But when you have car companies who are lauding hydrogen as a reason to not lean forward on electrification and to drive those vehicles now, and then to take their full responsibility to driving out clean electric infrastructure as well, and to do that sooner, then that becomes a climate issue as well. So hydrogen has got a huge role to play. And it is tricky, and it's also, just to say we do understand it is tricky for governments and business, because if you're not going to try and make a choice, you want to allow different options, you're probably going to have to go forcefully and with pace on more than one option, and recognise that your support as a government may not always pay off. You are probably going to invest in some things which may not work. It's that Betamax versus VHS choice again and again and again. And we need to have the environment where governments are supported to be making investments which may not pay off if we're going to achieve the speed of action we need as well. So it is tricky.
Okay, thank you, Luke. So I think drawing things to a close and reflecting on some of the comments we've heard just here, key takeaways for me are, as you said, Jonathan, mix of solutions. We need all the tools in the box. It's not one size fits all, and it's early days to confirm who are going to be the winners. It's not necessarily just electrification of hydrogen, although of course a key role for hydrogen, and then feeding that through into what you were saying, Lincoln, in terms of if we've got a whole systems approach, that will help us to plan and decide how to bring forward this mix of solutions that we need, recognising, as you said, Luke, that we're going to have some trials, and we're going to have to recognise that not everything that we try is going to succeed, but we do need to go through those processes to find where hydrogen will be the absolute right solution and where other solutions will come to the fore as well. So on that note, thank you everybody for coming and listening to this session. Thanks for a fantastic discussion, guys. It's really interesting. Great to hear from you all. Thank you.
Thank you.